If you've never been lonely, you don't realise what it is like.
Is it loud enough?
It feels as though you've been dumped in the deep end and there's nobody there to rescue you.
Well, you go hours and hours, never speak to anybody.
I don't think you'll ever get used to it. You know, it's always loneliness.
How do you measure loneliness when even trying to talk about it takes your breath away?
The room's just empty.
"91-year-old Margaret Nicholas has lived in this house virtually her whole life, first with her parents, then her husband and family. 2 years ago her husband died. Now it's just her.
We used to do the garden together, do our shopping together, everything was done together.
But you obviously miss him.
I do.
Margaret's granddaughter takes her shopping and neighbours pop in to check she's okay, but it's everyday company she misses.
Some people would think me a bit odd, but I do chatter to my husband. I do it so I'm sort of, speaking.
That's the wife with a cousin.
Roy Croucher lives a short drive away. He and Margaret have loneliness in common. He lost his only son to cancer and then his wife for 50 years.
I'm always hoping that the wife will come through the door, which she never will. If you go out, you come back, and you come back to an empty house, and it's loneliness again. And you're always waiting for somebody to call.
Roy says he's lucky. A friend and her family see him most weeks. But like Margaret, some days the only voice he'll hear is a call from a phone befriending service run by volunteers.
Judy rings up on a Saturday night, because last Saturday she was the first person I spoke to all day.
And that's a long day.
It is a long day.
And how much difference has that made, that phone call that comes on Saturday night when you haven't spoken to anyone else all day?
Well, I always look forward to it. I always put that phone on that seat, ready to pick it up. And that's a great help.
The campaign to end loneliness says it should now be treated as a public health issue. Identifying the most vulnerable is critical, then offering support to cope with the bewildering and painful reality of ending up alone.
I've never been on my own ever before. No.
And so getting used to that has been hard.
It has. I don't think I shall ever get really used to it.
It's just something that is thrown at you. And you can't throw it back to anybody.
So you get the basics of that these are people who are, that this is very common. I make a sort of funny comment because my mother's 82, got married in February. So I was happy about that because she was getting quite lonely all the time as being a widow. And now she's remarried and she's not lonely at all anymore. So that's quite good. But nonetheless, the fact of it is, you see, it's an epidemic in our culture, this loneliness. And so I'm going to share the screen and go through a very short presentation and then pass it over to Kathy, okay? So I don't know if I introduced myself ahead of time, but my name's Alex Schadenberg, and I'm the Executive Director of the Euthanasia Prevention Coalition, if you didn't know. And Kathy is the Executive Director of Compassionate Community Care. So the concept is caring for our own, caring, not killing, okay? And it doesn't want to move here. Yes, no, well, there we go. So why is it important to care for our own? Well, I think we live in a culture of abandonment. I think that the culture has shifted on us. And this culture of abandonment associated with assisted death. I think assisted death, euthanasia, assisted suicide is directly connected to our culture of abandonment. There's a lot of loneliness in our culture, a lot of people who feel their life lacks meaning, purpose, or value. So we're saying it's essential that people who feel that their life lacks purpose or value, that they feel like no one cares about them, that these people are offered purpose, support, and genuine hope in their significant community. So it's important that we, who are part of a significant community, share that time. The answer is to care and be with others as they journey through their difficult times of their life. So a recent study in Copenhagen University, now this was a study that looked at people who had just had a heart attack. So everybody who had a heart attack over a period of time in Denmark became part of the study. And Denmark also has a universal healthcare system. So whether it was a massive study of well over 8,000 people. And the study found that women who described themselves as lonely were 3 times more likely to die within the year of another heart attack than those who had an active social life. And men who described themselves as lonely were twice as likely to die within the year. So loneliness was clearly a factor in people surviving or dying after a heart attack. Patients who were lonely were also 3 times more likely to be anxious, depressed, and they reported a lower quality of life. A survey of 1,896 seniors 65 and older in the UK, more than 1 in 5, 22% said they have a conversation with no more than 3 people over the span of an entire week. And Roy Crocker mentioned that when he received that phone call on Saturday, that was the first person he had talked to that day. A quarter of older adults said it makes them feel good when someone smiles or acknowledges them while waiting in line at a place like the bank or a grocery store. 1 in 5 would be thrilled if someone simply stopped and asked them how their day had gone. So it shows you how clear loneliness is within our culture. And I say that's the UK. Nonetheless, I don't think our culture is any different. According to the U.S. Census Bureau, 12.5 million older adults live in a one-person household, and that represents 28% of people 65 or older. And so this national poll on aging, which was done by the American Association of Retired Persons, found that 1 in 3 senior citizens are lonely. This is in the U.S., though. Research shows that the chronic loneliness can impact an older person's memory, physical well-being, mental health, and life expectancy. More than a third of the seniors in the poll said they felt a lack of companionship, and almost 30% said they socialized with friends, families, or neighbors only once a week or less. So when euthanasia was legalized in Canada, many people thought it would only impact a few people. In Canada, there were more than 13,000 assisted deaths in 2022. We don't know the exact number yet, but there's been a fair amount of research done to show what the numbers are, even though the federal government's not released the number yet. It's probably more like 13,200, I'm thinking now. But anyway, and that was up from 10,064 in 2021. In 2021, 1,740 people listed loneliness and isolation as a reason for asking for euthanasia. Significant. And that's only people who are saying this, like meaning someone might be asking for euthanasia thinking I have health problems, whatever, I might be living in poverty, etc. But loneliness and isolation is a primary factor for them. But they listed this as their primary reason, 1,740 people. What is more concerning is that the trend is up. Why do people ask for MAID, euthanasia? So we're told that people ask for MAID because of pain or suffering. That's what we're told. That's the sales pitch that we're given. But the data suggests that very few people actually ask for death for these reasons. There are some people who are radical autonomous, my body, my choice. Most people ask for death because they are at a difficult time in their life. They feel lonely and depressed, socially isolated, and have lost purpose, meaning, hope, purpose, value. So, the people that in your life who are going through difficult times, some of them might be considering MAID, not because they actually really want it, but they're feeling that there's no meaning or purpose in their life. An Irish study that was conducted over a 6-year period, so that's significant, a study over 6 years, dealing with over 8,000 people over the age of 50. Now, I'm 55, so 50 was a bit young. Nonetheless, you get the point. Found that 3.5% of people had a wish to die. Now, this is important because when you connect people who have a wish to die to the question of euthanasia, you see that there's a direct correlation between the two. Those who had a wish to die, 72% were identified as lonely, and 60% had significant depressive symptoms. Now, what was important about the study is it was done over a 6-year period, and they show in the study how you have a fluctuation of a wish to die. So when someone did not have a wish to die, often it's because their life had changed and they weren't feeling lonely. They were not experiencing the same type of depressive symptoms as they had in the past. So you see this fluctuation within the study. So we need a culture that cares, not one that kills. Euthanasia threatens my life and it threatens your life. Human experience tells us that it's normal for you when you're experiencing a serious illness or personal difficulties or mental distress that you might also feel and also loneliness, that you feel fear for your future, you will question your purpose for living, you'll experience existential distress or situational depression. It's normal for people to lose hope at times in their life. That's why we need each other. Suffering alone, loneliness, isolation, depression, loss of hope or purpose, these are leading reasons why people are asking to have their life ended. And these are all normal feelings. These are all normal feelings. So the Compassionate Care Community charity was created to help people who experience difficult health conditions, but also to provide a training program for people to visit those in your community, those who you may know, those who might be part of your church community, those who you might have a connection to, significant community, to visit the people who are living with loneliness and social isolation. We can protect people from euthanasia by being a caring influence, by truly being caring. The Compassionate Community Care Volunteer Training Program, which we're offering today, gives you the tools to visit and to be with others. Our point is we can change the world one person at a time. We can protect them by caring for them, okay? So what happens? Well, you're going to get information. I don't even have to go through this, but nonetheless, when you're visiting someone and journeying with them, what are you doing? You're affirming their purpose for living. You reduce their loneliness and isolation, and you help them find a way through the depression and isolation. You allay their fear of suffering. And you're not doing it by being a psychologist or psychiatrist. You're doing it by caring, right? God created us to be with others. Interconnectedness is essential to the human person. We have a lot of loneliness in our culture, and these people, like yourself, need to be with others. We are all affected by the legalization of euthanasia because we're all human, and we all experience these similar human emotions and feelings. Cultural loneliness affects our health, it affects our quality of life, and it can be a threat to our life. And I think you'll see that very clearly by the end of this training. We are focusing on visiting the lonely and caring for our own, the members of our churches, the communities around us, our neighbors, etc. Why? Because it's our goal to replace a culture of death with a culture of care. And I will stop the share and let Kathy introduce the next part of the presentation.
Thank you, Alex, and thanks for that introduction. So as Alex mentioned, it's very important that we visit and start these visiting opportunities within our communities. So I'll start us off this evening, and it's lovely to see all you, so welcome, and then thank you so much for joining us. I direct the Compassionate Community Care agency and group here in London, Ontario, but we service all of Canada throughout. So we get calls, as you know, some of you may know, we do have a helpline, and we often get calls on that as well. But tonight, I just want to reflect a little bit about the philosophy of why we visit. And so I'll be introducing this and leading us into tonight's segment and training. So it's really important to share this with you now, especially because we see in this video that Alex showed us just now that there is a strong lack of companionship among our seniors and our elderly. And why it's so important to visit is ultimately because it does reduce loneliness. It takes away that feeling of isolation and social withdrawal that a lot of people experience, especially if it's at later in life and, you know, they may not have those visits from the family, from their children, from their grandchildren even. Over COVID, we did a study and called Honoring Our Seniors at CCC. And we found that one of the major trends that was witnessed over COVID was the increase in loneliness, feelings of despair, hopelessness. And for those of the people that we interviewed that expressed that they were still in contact with people and their loved ones, they fared better. They actually fared really well during COVID. And they found that this was an experience that drew them closer to those groups and those people and those individuals. So it's really important to stay in touch with others and actually reconnect and make those connections. We want to ensure also when we visit is to watch for signs of self-neglect and abuse. And the only way to know that and to find that out is to visit with others, to meet with them, to be with them in person. And as we share this program being with, it's important and integral part of this program to actually spend time with one another and reconnect. This also visiting will provide a sense of belonging and value to the person and the individual that you're meeting with. And they'll find that they become, they have a further purpose now. It's not just simply to do what it is that they need to do day in, day out and kind of the mundane things, but they have a reason to continue. And this program, especially the My Story, it will shed some light on why that is that case. And it's beautiful and it's designed very practically. So you'll find that is a very practical approach. In the chat, I've actually posted two articles, and those are the actual programs for this evening. So if you have a physical copy of the book, it looks like this, and it's got two people on the front there. Sorry, I faded my background, but if you do have one of these physical copies, then you can use that. But if you don't, we can ship one of these out to you by all means. So just let us know by email or phone. You can leave a message and we'll send those over to you if you'd like a hard copy. But you can click on the PDF in the chat box as well, and that'll open this up. So you don't have to take notes on what we're sharing with you tonight. Okay, so first we're going to touch on the human needs, which are really the four main needs: are physical, mental, social, and spiritual. And when we talk about these needs, it's important to realize that all of us, regardless of age, background, belief system, creed, share the same basic needs. And these are basic human needs. So that's why it's so important to keep these in mind when you're visiting with others. And all of these, the physical needs, we're going to share a little bit first about this, which is the need for obviously exercising. And so the first thing is to keep in mind that a person may not be exercising at all as they get older, right? I'm sure some of us have gotten more agile and become more flexible as time goes on and whatever. But the point is, a lot of us haven't. And I know for my own self, I have 4 young children, and it's become almost like a chore you have to get to. But someone else, maybe like Alex, he runs for every single day of his life. It's like for the living. So what I admire most about that is that people keep a certain consistency. And what's important here is to encourage people to have exercise in their life. So especially if they're not meeting those physical needs, you could then encourage them to do that. And you could partake in a simple way to do that: walking, going out, even just sitting outdoors, maybe going for a quick ride even, or whatever works for them. If they're in a wheelchair perhaps, or they use a wheelchair, you could take them and offer them to take them around wherever their close areas allow them to be, and work for them obviously and what they're comfortable with. And just keeping in mind too that a person's physical limitations might come out, so not pressuring them to do things that they're not used to or they're not looking forward to doing, not forcing them obviously, but just whatever they're comfortable to do is really key here. And one other thing is the nutrition factor. When someone has, for example, needs like hydration, this is really important. Nutrition, what they're eating is really important, and making sure that they're getting their basic necessities every day, okay? I know I speak to some members of my family, like today, earlier I spoke to someone. They asked me what we ate for breakfast. I said we had an egg each for each of my family, my members and my kids. So that's a half a dozen right there. And they said, well, I had 4 eggs. And this is a single individual. So I said, wow, well, that seems like, that's their needs. But again, people's needs are very different. So I encourage you to kind of be part of that, because you could be a very positive role model and an influence on that person when you speak to them about their nutritional needs as well, in case they may not be aware of. Hydration. Hydration is so key here. Why would we share this? Why? Because oftentimes as you get older, you may actually find you need more fluids, more water. And as people get older, especially, for example, women take typically more drugs than men as they age. And if you have dehydration factored in, combined with working maybe outdoors, maybe they're gardening, they may not have those early signs of dehydration. So it's important, especially now in these summer months, hot weather is on us. And it's important that if there's less water in your body, especially for the elderly, medications that dissolve in water require lower dosages sometimes. And because they remain highly concentrated in the body, you may have to monitor that more closely. So seniors also may have more fat in their bodies, especially since during COVID, we saw a lot of people maybe put on some weight. And, it's important that we know this, that the kidneys and the liver, they may not work as effectively and efficiently as they used to. So for these reasons, seniors may require lower dosages of medicines as well. So just keeping that in mind and reminding that to people, and hydration is really key and important. And all these factors account for why seniors have more side effects also for medications than any other age group. So we want to make sure that you're aware of that as well. And now with, for example, sleep, this is a major factor too. A lot of people need to keep up on their sleep and keep, to certain hours and at least a certain amount of hours of sleep. And that can play out in acts of, if it goes off the spectrum or off the, regard, then they may have experienced, for example, hallucinations or even other signs and symptoms. So it's important to keep that in check and also keep that at the forefront of what they're doing and making sure that they get enough sleep too. And also, just to be aware of this, medication needs. Over 90% of seniors age 65 or older take at least one drug per week. So this is important to keep in mind. More than 40% take at least 5 drugs per week, and 12% or more take upwards to 10 drugs or more per week. And so this is important to keep that in mind as well. In terms of how people react with their mental needs, your brain is like a muscle. And so we need to keep it stimulated and involved, and also making sure that we allow them to have stimulation. So they require that, and we want to make sure you stay alert and active. And it's important to keep that in mind, especially. So, this is important for anyone. If you're gardening, for example, you want to engage your senses. That person, they might enjoy gardening, and they might want to play, for example, musical instrument, or they enjoy walking. Those are all great exercises, and they're also great exercises for the brain. So reading, doing puzzles will also help to stimulate it. We attend a local seniors residence with my family, my young children, and it's a nice opportunity for us to get out in the community. And so we see them, and when we go out, we do activities together, do crafts, and that's a form of mental stimulation. And it's very involved because the kids get involved with their hands, and there's a lot of intricate pieces and things like that sometimes. But the seniors love it because they get to be involved in interwork and play also at the same time with the younger children. So it's a great experience for everyone. And so these are part of our mental needs. We want to create the stimulation as well that keep people interested. And also, one factor to keep in mind here is the other side, which is depression. This is a serious issue for many seniors. And this often will affect people, and it shows up in various ways. Sometimes it may lead to, for example, seniors with depression are 4 times more likely to have alcohol-related problems. And so that's a big risk factor. And so 80 to 90% of residents that live in long-term care actually have some form of mental disorder. And that depression is present in approximately 50% of residents. So that's from the Canadian Coalition for Seniors Mental Health. So what are some of the signs of depression? It could be characterized by sadness, decreased appetite, insomnia. So again, that sleep is a factor, very big consideration. And also loss of interest in hobbies, not wanting to go out, not even wanting to socialize. I know some people in our family, even close relatives who over COVID didn't really want to go out, didn't want to partake in things. And that was part of the factor too of depression, and that increased over COVID, especially for some people too. Some people also find that that for people who are institutionalized, elders especially, those with medical illness have the highest instances of depression, which can be as high as 70% following a stroke. So just be wary and alert to that the higher risk a person had of a stroke, the more increased risk they are to depression as well. And so one thing that to keep in mind here is with dementia, that's also a common issue we see with some people who have various mental needs. That affects 1 in 20 people over the age of 65 and 1 in 6 over the age of 80. So this is a large growing trend too. Dementia symptoms, that is a progressive impairment of memory and other areas of cognition, which results in an eventually reduced ability to care for oneself. So one thing to keep in mind there is that, it does affect a lot of people. It can kind of grow slowly over time and becomes more and more severe as people age. And people suffering from dementia often will experience anxiety. They'll have depression as well early in the disease, and then delusions potentially, or hallucinations in the later stages. So it's an important thing to keep in mind. Alzheimer's is a type of dementia, and it's within the group of symptoms. It's a very specific brain disease, and that accounts anywhere between 60 to 80% of dementia cases. So keeping that in mind, and that of course affects memory, reasoning, and other thinking skills. Okay, and so as we're looking at, for example, social needs, and the lack of social relationships is a very strong risk factor for early death. As Alex said in the video as well that was shared at the beginning, if someone has not many relationships or social interactions, that can also lead and be a precursor for earlier death. So we want to ensure that people are aware of this, and it's important to remain active and involved with people in their community. And what we want to ensure too is to stay connected. A call means everything. Just simply picking up the phone and sharing with someone that you care about them, once a day even is great. If you can manage that, or even once every few days or a week, is very nice, because that person realizes that you care. Otherwise, people will often say 1 in 5 Canadians will share that the ages 65 and older, they indicate that they actually feel lonely at some time or often. The proportion is even higher among those that are 85 years and older. 25% feel that they are lonely some of the time or more often. And then, of course, things are compounded on top of that. For example, if a person is a widow, the loss of a spouse will increase that. And those are all risk factors as well for social isolation and loneliness. And so older women mostly also are more likely to be widowed than older men. So it is something to keep in mind. And so with social isolation, you might find it's evidenced by an objective indicator, for example, having a small social network, or being unmarried. If there's some person single or participating in a few activities with others, those have been associated with an increased risk of dementia and cognitive decline. So also important points to keep in mind. One thing too is that most seniors who feel connected to their family, but they might fear being a burden to them. And this is one thing just to keep an eye on and to be very sensitive to, is if you hear that type of language, oh, I don't want to be a burden on them. Well, they feel that if they're being if it's an issue to their loved ones, they don't want to bring on their own troubles or worries or hardships, but they might become then more reluctant to talk to someone about their needs, and especially about the meaning of life or death. Sometimes life after death, for example, those conversations are important, and instead they prefer to talk about their fears and worries. So existential questions may arise for individuals later in life, but they don't want to bring those up because they don't want to be a burden on their loved ones. So they don't tackle those, but instead they talk about their fears and worries. So just being aware of that, it's very important. Oftentimes we get calls about this, and then we can relay them to other professionals too. And if their faith matters or belief creed type questions, then people can be called on and that have expertise in that. But it is something to keep in mind as well. One more thing to note is here that unfortunately seniors often lack close relationships to do those types of further assessments and make those other connections. So that's why it's really a key important for those of you who start visiting, to be aware of that and be part of the solution there. Okay, and one thing it is to note here is that if a person may say something like, I'm tired, or having the feeling of being tiredness, expressing that term actually is associated, now we see, with the need to talk to others about fears and worries. So a very important kind of connection and draw is that when you hear that word of tiredness, that also often will relate to the fact that a person is worried about certain fears and worries. So just keeping that in mind. And then, of course, communication. When you're speaking to someone, when someone is confiding in you, close relationships will grow and blossom over time. So it's important to stay involved and stay, in that same contact, and be very much a person that they can confide in, keeping things private that have to be private and confidential. And having confiding talks with other residents, for example, in a nursing home, are rare. But what happens often is someone is maybe being visited by you, and then you go and you notice that another person needs a visit as well. So you may want to grow that visiting that you can experience in that home or in that resident building, and connect with that individual as well. So it just kind of blossoms from that, which is beautiful. It is recommended that seniors are helped and encouraged to use electronic media. And for example, if communication can't happen in person, maybe over the phone, using devices like Skype or video chat or voice calls, even teaching them how to, for example, send a voice message. Sometimes people use just chat, which is great, but sometimes they want to share a message, but they don't want to leave a voicemail. So there's so many interactions that they can do. Facebook Messenger. There's also, for example, Snapchat or Instagram. There's so many apps nowadays that, you call someone on their phone and they respond to you via email. It's funny. But the point is, you can say and offer that person, hey, I can show you how to use this app, or I can show you how to use this type of technology. That way they feel that they can open up more opportunities to communicate as well. Perfect. So in terms of spiritual needs, again, being one of the main 4 needs, these are things that involve your relationship with God. And it's very impersonal. It's very specific to a person and cater to their life and their experience. And in terms of your visits, it's nice to know this because oftentimes we think we come from our own perspective, which is great, but just keeping in mind that your position, your person, your personality and your spiritual needs are completely different most of the time than someone else that's in your same shoes or someone who you're meeting with or visiting with. And again, this will bring up a whole other potential array of issues. Some people may find that they are very reluctant to speak about their spiritual needs. Some may be very open. And so this is just something to keep in mind. I've encountered this myself. They may ask you to pray with them. Again, the prayer type and style may be very different from your own background. So just being open to what they are all right with and what they're comfortable with is key too here. And one thing I'll say is, when you're speaking to someone, let's say you're part of an organization like CWL or the Knights, and you're talking to another person about church, maybe in those, conversations, you pick up that they're a little bit reluctant to talk about certain things because of maybe issues that have happened in the church. So just keeping that awareness, trusting yourself and trusting your intuition, how to proceed is important here, but just being sensitive to people's needs as well. It's really key. This may also come out, for example, with a person, if let's say, a person needs to talk about forgiveness or spiritual needs like reconciliation, or talking about, discernment or other spiritual needs or wants. So it's important to just designate that and understand what those concepts mean to each person. They may be very, very different. And it is very much a cultural context. The interpretation of whether a specific need is spiritual versus religious depends on their attitudes. And some people prefer certain language, spirituality versus religiosity. So just keeping that in mind. Religious needs obviously can vary per person, and just being aware of that and assessing them to know what they're comfortable with again. Because most elderly people today are often from a specific religious background, there may be some who are skeptical about using that term, spirituality, and then recognizing that they may view this term as being connected to the occult too is another factor too, just to keep in mind. And, if people refer to the term believing instead of religious, because they may have been distancing themselves from the church as an institution, again, is a factor too. Many seniors have a desire to attend a religious ceremony, but are unable to. So keeping that in mind, maybe they would like to go and attend a service with you or be open to other services, and asking them, okay, would there be something that I could assist you with in that regard? And keeping that communication open and an opportunity. Another point here is there's different types of spiritual needs. So we mentioned religious needs. So for example, great ways to express religious needs are people praying for and being with one another, attending a religious ceremony, participating in that as well, reading religious or spiritual books. A lot of that time we found in our study with seniors recently that many people got through COVID because they had a spiritual belief or a higher belief in God. And so this importance made a significant impact on them during COVID and actually helped a lot of people get through COVID too. So that was a very important trend we saw. And another thing is for the people that they have a religious need, is to turn to a higher presence. Some people started a prayer app or prayer group during COVID, especially. And other members, for example, they just were part of a faith community, and they may have gotten some of that was either turned off or not available. So they had to grow from that experience as well. Some existential needs that we see are, for example, reflecting on someone's previous life experiences. So, my story, this is where my story comes into play. And it's so lovely because the person's spiritual needs may vary so much, and they can share that to you and share how important it's been, for them in their life. One other thing that they can talk about is the meaning of suffering and peace, and also meaning of life. And talking about the possibility of life after death is another spiritual or existential need that they may need. And it also calls on the need for inner peace. So that's really key here. And that's why we talk about this here, is that a lot oftentimes we see that people they want to desire to dwell in quietness, peace, beauty. And so this may include talking to others about their fears and worries as well. So again, that's another thing that often people will find. They'll bring in another person, maybe to evaluate and help that person through those needs, okay? The final thing I just want to mention here is the need for giving. The desire to pass one's experiences to the next generation is something that is mentioning, is what we mean by need for giving. And that's known as generativity. And so when you pass along that generational wisdom, as they say, is really key. So those golden nuggets of your life, how you come across, how you found life and how you move through issues and struggles, that's something that some people want to pass along. And that's why the My Story is so great and effective too. And this basic need also helps to assure that person's life, that it had meaning and value and purpose. So this is important to generativity, to ensure that a person has that ability to pass along those gifts of wisdom. And this basic need may be fulfilled by using the My Story program. So this is why it's so important that you're all here. And of course, for life satisfaction, people may often will experience intrinsic need for life satisfaction, which is my life, my general health, social friendships, things like that, family life. And then there's the external, which is, where they live or they work, what perspective they take on their future, their financial security, all those things. So that's important too. All these needs compose together, their physical, mental, social, and spiritual needs. All those needs need to be met. That results in a person being at peace with themselves and the world. Unfortunately, many seniors don't feel this way. And so we often want to just share all of this as a holistic approach, because it is important and it's very practical. Maybe by speaking with someone, you may meet with them, you actually have a conversation at some point and say, instead of using the word, what are your needs? That could be too strong. You replace it with, what would you wish for? Do not ask what do you need, but rather, what would you prefer or wish for? So then that's a question that you can have as well. And then our next chapter, what we're going to share with you a little bit about is about visiting advice. And so this is one of my favorites. And I like talking about visiting because I started visiting with my own kids, and we have a great seniors home that is an independent residence that people live alone in, and they participate in community events. So we go there about once a month, sometimes more often, and we see and we meet with people. And then if people want personal visits, we go and we meet with them personally as well after. So it's really nice. Okay. Just a COVID update. If you are experiencing, that you're going in and there's still COVID and you feel like this is an issue that you need to ensure that you're in the know of, and when you encounter a long-term care facility, just being up to date on their protocols is important. For example, if they require any kind of personal protective equipment, keeping that in mind. Hand sanitizer is good to have if you not able to wash your hands more frequently. Maybe if you need a face mask or a visor, something like a mingle mask, some people use that as well. If people are more comfortable being around you with that and you feel more comfortable, then by all means, definitely do a self-assessment before you visit. Just check yourself. How do you feel today? Did you feel any symptoms coming on? My kids, all of a sudden, my daughter yesterday started feeling really ill. She's been throwing up throughout the day. Those are days when I try not to meet with other people either, just in the event that I might pass along something. I might not experience the symptoms myself, but maybe I'll pass along them to someone else. I'd rather not take that risk. So I avoid that meetings during those days. Other encounters, you may decide you want to keep more distance. For example, a person may feel more comfortable being distant with you. Obviously, in the first few interactions too, if you're just meeting one another, keeping that 6 feet or 2 meters is helpful if they are more comfortable, and it makes you comfortable as well. Also, washing often, I think, is the best prevention standard of care, and making sure your hands are clean. You can sanitize them as well before and after visiting. That would be helpful to ensure that you don't contage any, items or things that you partake in, and you can actually pass things along to someone. And then, of course, rescheduling your visits. If you're uncomfortable and you don't feel well, by all means, feel free to call a person and say, Mr. So-and-so, I would love to meet with you today. I was really looking forward to this, but unfortunately, I've come down with this flu or this symptom, and I just don't want to risk you getting ill from me. So would it be all right with you if we were scheduled for next week, and provide a time and date that works for both of you? Okay. And it's very considerate of a person to do that. So we appreciate it, and I'm sure they'll appreciate very much to have that. And making sure that you follow through on that is important. One thing, just before you speak and when you meet with a person, that you want to ensure before you go that you have, all the things that you need before you actually meet with the person. So when you do go ahead and meet with them, check that you have your things with you. Sometimes people want a clipboard. Those are really handy. And, just having something like a hard surface to write on. You might bring a notebook, for example, like a little brief, like a journal or something you can jot notes in. That's for your own self, just for your own, memory. I find we have issues more and more these days with remembering things. So if a person makes a mention of a birthday, a name of a child, grandchild, you could note those things down into your little notebooks, and it's helpful to have. And it's very practical. And so when you arrive, it's important just to keep these things in mind. Communication, there's nonverbal, obviously, emotions, conversation tips. We're going to talk about all of this, okay? So I'll just go over that when I move into each slide. So before you go, thinking things that you might need, you may need certain requirements. For example, if you call an administrator of a nursing home, long-term care facility, hospital, and you say, hey, my name is, Kathy Costa, and I'd love to visit with some of your seniors. People may have experienced feelings of social isolation or might be a little bit shut in. Would it be possible for me to come by and visit with them? Well, they might say, oh, we definitely require this criminal background check, vulnerable sector check, or whatever it is. All this is going into a police station nearby and a department and asking for them to perform a criminal background check. If they want more detail, definitely you would do a vulnerable sector check as well. And that's because you're being screened because you are surrounding or connecting to being in contact with vulnerable persons, the elderly, seniors, okay? So that's something why you may want to consider. Again, if there is a cost or fee to these and you require some assistance with that, please feel free to reach out to us. We don't want any financial issue to prevent you from visiting and being with others. So we'd encourage you to reach out to us if you'd like support with that. Once that's complete, you're good to go. Usually, you might be part of an organization, a group, maybe, like I said earlier, a group from your church, or you're starting your own ministry within your background and your faith background. You can partake in that by speaking to the pastor or whoever you're involved with, or going to the group that you feel comfortable in your community and saying, I'd like to start this program. And it's an effective program. So just being involved with that and spearheading that in a responsible way is really key. And one thing I would just say that if you are, meeting with them, just making sure you have everything that you need before you meet with them. So speaking to the administrator is important there. Of course, dressing appropriately, we all know how to dress, and making sure that we're, dressed in a way that's comfortable to us, but also just keeping in mind that, you wear clean, modest clothing. Nothing too bold is really, really what we want to watch for. And nothing that could be offensive, like perfume, sometimes maybe a little bit too much for people to have. So just keeping that in mind as well, that's important. And if you're representing an organization, for example, or you've started a group, wear something that identifies who you are. You could actually put on a badge, or you could put some ID on, or something that shows that you're involved with a group that is deliberately partaking in this service or this ministry that helps, or this work that is a visiting program. So it's great. And of course, you want to make sure that you've arranged the visit properly, choosing a time to visit that's appropriate for the person you're visiting, knowing their schedule. So if they like to sleep in the mornings, for example, not scheduling a visit in the morning is good. If they like to partake in other activities, let's say later afternoon, and they're not so keen on having visitors, let's say before dinner or after lunch, whatever it is, just make sure you arrange the visit that works for everyone involved, okay? And what do? Planning ahead. So I see a lot of people who have various interests. I'm sure your interests are different than mine. Just similarly, whoever you're visiting with, they might have different interests. So you may want to be mindful of that and keep in mind, okay, so I would love to speak to them about this, or share maybe a story that there's, something that I experienced today. Bringing your iPad or something like a book is really helpful too. Or maybe you want to go for a walk. So just keeping ideas fresh in your mind is really helpful as well. And so when you arrive, a great thing to do is to start off and actually wash your hands. It shows care, and it's just a nice way to introduce that you're, obviously aware that you don't want them to get sick or anything, or pass anything along. One thing you too may want to keep in mind is how you commence the visit, making sure your hands are warm. just doing this, perhaps rubbing your hands together, washing them in warm water, whatever. But the point is that if you touch their hand or if you touch their arm or something when you meet them or greet them, the touch of a cold hand can be an unpleasant shock. And so just keeping that in mind too. You know, making sure you introduce yourselves when you walk into the room. There might be another person like a roommate that's in that room with them. So just keeping that in mind that, hello, my name is Kathy and I'm here to visit with Brian, you know, and so you keep that kind of standard that you introduce to yourself to others in the room. And so not wearing rings on the hands, except of course, if you have a special, like a, you know, simple wedding band is good, but jewelry can scratch delicate hands. And so you don't want to pass along germs either. So just keeping that in mind too could get in the way. And so during the visit, always being mindful of, you know, we can address people who are senior to us with Mr., Mrs., Miss, whatever they suggest otherwise. And just, you know, approaching the person from the front. So this is important to keep in mind that when you're meeting with someone, you don't want to come and startle them or surprise them. I did that the other day and my husband said, you gave me a heart attack. So we want to control how we present ourselves. So I prefer to just address myself when I meet someone for the first time, and anyone else in the room knows that who we are. And then during the visit, obviously being attentive, being sensitive, being kind, these are all common, you know, kind of golden rule things. And so we don't go into this too much in detail, but, you know, just making sure you're, for example, aware of things like if there is a television or radio on and you walk in and it's quite loud, you can ask them, do you mind if I just turn this down a little bit? And of course, if you're leaving, you can say, oh, do you mind if I turn that radio back up again for yourself? Okay, because they might appreciate that. So just considerations that you might be aware of. Okay, and always tell them what you're going to do before you do it. So if you're going to move something, if you want to present something to them, please address that and show that and share it before you do it. Because it matters and they will appreciate knowing what you're doing before you do something. In terms of communication, language matters. That's the background behind that is that you want to use person first language. So for example, when you're addressing a person with a disability, you don't say a disabled person. Or for example, when you say a child with autism versus an autistic child. Okay, the issue is not who the person is, it's person with something that may pertain to them, but it's not necessarily who they are. It's not part of who they are as an identity. And so also another example, an individual with epilepsy, not an epileptic, right? So just common sense type of things here. Treat people the way you want them to treat you, obviously. Always ask first what people are willing to accept. No, if they say no to you, then accept that. If they don't want any assistance, then obviously politely realize that they just don't want to be assisted. So always asking first is important, and respecting their personal boundaries. I find that's really important. We went to a lady's house once with my kids. And so my kids are very much the types that they like to run in and kind of go after everything that they see. And I have to train them to hold back and to say no and to ask before they move into another quarter, into another room, or even the washroom. So that's a challenge already, but not beyond that. You know, if you perceive a situation that you'd like to move into, say the living room, or if you ask them, oh, would you like a drink of water or anything, just to assume that these things, obviously you have to kind of come at it as be as polite and cheerful as possible. So one thing is I would love to share too with you is cheerfulness. It is important to put on a happy, smiley face. And I know it's underrated often. We don't realize how important it is, but you know, it can get really mundane, right? If we don't cheer up some days. And the world is a crazy place. So I find it's important to bring the positive. And I see these smiling faces. Thank you, Lori, Gianni, and Norman, because, you know, we appreciate that. You know, the fact that you have your camera on, your faces are shown, you know, I really value that. And, you know, it's important to be a good listener. It's important that you're attentive, giving people time to respond, being alert, you know, not, you know, obviously dozing off because the person needs you to be there and being present. It's important. Being aware of boundaries, being aware of dangers. If you're on a walk, and the other day we were walking with someone and a dog is approaching, I'm from the mentality that if it's a dog and they're not on a leash, or if they're even on a leash, but they're not really being, held tightly, that it could become a difficulty, right? And that you never trust a certain, any kind of animal, even a small one, it could jump up and bite you or bite someone, even a young child. So I try not to get into other animals, areas. So just being aware of different things that might come up is important. And then also just when you're talking to people, some people use different gestures to communicate. And that's something where, you're using nonverbal communication, but those gestures may mean something differently to you than versus to what someone else may perceive. So for example, if you say like, come here, they may understand that, but they may also not know what you mean, like who you're talking to. So just being really deliberate is important here. And being very clear about your communication. Nonverbal communication, facial expressions mean a lot. Oftentimes, if people can't hear you or hard of hearing, you may want to share with them openly in other ways. Show them what you're doing. If you want to write something, you show that you're trying to write something and understand. You may want to show on your phone what you are trying to describe, explain to them. One other thing here is touch. Only hold their hand if the person is comfortable with it, and respect the wish of those that do not wish to be touched. Okay, this is very key here. Obviously, it's in common sense, but some people may not realize there's certain sensitivities. Your voice is also important. Be sensitive to the feelings behind the words that you're speaking, and respond to the intonation of people's voices. So if they change their the way they speak in their tone, just be aware of that. Eye contact too, avoidance of eye contact if someone's looking down and not paying attention to you. Maybe that issue, something they're sharing, they may not be responding to well or positively. So you may want to encourage to change the conversation or move the conversation along. Body movements, if a person, the way they sit, the way they walk, they stand or they uphold themselves, their head, it's not as strong an indicator of feelings as originally believed. Instead, take notice of how they move their hands. Are they fidgety? Or tightly held together. So that's another expression of a body movement that you may want to pay attention to. And in terms of appearance may reveal many things about a person and how they feel about themselves. One thing is their self-esteem. Are their clothes clean? Is their hair combed? Clothing may reveal one's status economically, but also it could show their culture as well. And it's an important influence on how appearance are judged. So just be aware of that. Appearance may also reveal if they're being cared for properly by others. So if a person looks unkempt and it's repeated, it's one thing. But if there is a systematic kind of form of being showing an appearance of being unkept, then maybe that could be signs of something else underlying the surface, like neglect or abuse potentially. So just keeping aware of that. Also space, respect a person's personal space, in being aware that the culture, the social status, the prejudices that are involved in the history of a physical abuse may be all factors affecting one's need for personal space. So it's just remembering it's important to be sensitive not only to the body language and the nonverbal cues of others, but also to your own. Okay, so that's good. And in terms of emotions, recognizing that a person may be anxious or discouraged or frustrated, and that can show different ways. Don't take their unhappiness personally. They could just be unhappy with themselves or life or where they are right now in life. So just not taking that on personally for yourself. You can often say to a person, please reflect back to them what they said to you. So you feel like this, or maybe this might help. May I share like what you mean is this what you mean? So just going back and reflecting on what they say and reframing it or rephrasing it would be helpful sometimes to help calm their emotions. We were on a phone call the other day and a person got really heated quickly because they recalled all these events that happened over the course of the last year and a half with one of their loved ones. And so they said to us, I need to calm my emotions when I get on the phone call, when I get onto this call that you'll help me with. So I said, just be aware of your emotions. Just know that they don't feel what you're feeling, and they're not going to really be as objectively maybe helpful to those emotions in that moment. So it's better to just keep those in the background. Talk forward with what you want to say and what you want to assess, because what's your priority here in the call? You don't want to bring up and rehash all this history, right? So, but that's a different situation. When you're speaking with someone and they're emotional with you and you're meeting with them, it's important to keep in mind that the person is reflecting on their background and their history. So just being sensitive, being aware of that, and being open to it is really important. There's obviously different conversations that can happen. So if they're trying to share with you, just being opening to that is really key here. And often too, you want to validate their feelings. And that's one way that you can do is, though you may not agree with them, you can say things like, I understand how you may feel frustrated with how the hospital administration is treating you, or how the nurse just treated you, or whatever may have happened. Okay. And again, these situations change all the time. One thing in terms of conversation tips we can try is using statements in your conversation. Example, if it's windy outside, you can say, it makes me feel happy when, it's the nice breeze outside. Or you can say statements like, some people may view their questions as, opening up to things. So just using statements or questions, depending on how you feel, okay, and how the person perceives it. You can use statements versus questions. One thing too is just be conscious of memory issues. For example, if someone has an issue with their memory, like for example, dementia, you can ask questions that require only yes or no responses. So that way that person doesn't feel like this is an affront to them, or they're being discouraged by the conversation. Another thing you can do is encourage them to talk about their past. People love sharing about their histories, right? I'm sure, show of hands. If you ask yourselves right now, we sit down and have a My Story account, we would love to hear about what your experiences have been, because a past history is important to you and it's important to us, and we want to hear about it. So we definitely want to encourage them to do that. And you can, if you need to, you can actually say, if you want them to make a choice, ask one question at a time. Would you like some tea? Pause, wait for answer. I know there's a hand up, but if I can ask you to hold your question a bit, that would be great. And we'll assess the questions at the end, okay? Thank you so much. And then, would you like another question? So would you like, for example, a cookie, something else? So then just let them come back and respond to your question one at a time. And also, when someone speaks about their past, encourage them to talk about it openly, freely. Again, this is not an advocacy meeting right now, but what this is your openness to a person hearing what they have to share. So memories may be clearer to them than in the present. So it's important that you keep that in mind. You may go into an appointment in a meeting with someone and you say, okay, I want to do this, this, and this, and you have a plan of action, 3 points. But that may completely be thrown out the window because you get onto a conversation and it's just time goes and that's it. So sharing memories is the best thing. That will help make a person feel young and happy. So encourage them to share their memories, okay? Memories are beautiful. They're the gold parts of our lives. And we love to reflect on those good things. So it's great to share that and have them, talk openly about it. Everyone has a story, as you know, so it's important that everyone has an individual, unique background, and they're going to bring that in, and that'll share light to your conversation and also to your experience too. So just be patient and open to that. In terms of conversation tips, also, don't be impatient. So you may need to respond to some question or a number of times. I'd ask you to wait and kind of be more patient with people. And it is such a virtue. I struggle with it too often. So I know we all can work on that, right? I'm sure. And then also, of course, not to argue, because arguing is not going to help anyone. And so I don't encourage any arguments. I know lots of people in our family love to be political, like to talk about history, like to argue about history. That's a typical trait in our background and our demographic, but I find I don't bring that to the table, especially when I meet with people. And I assess that a person wants to be in a positive place. So I encourage that, and I encourage them to bring on whatever topics they like. Then you can look around their room, you can look around their surroundings to see what they might like and talk about those things and focus on them. We don't want to create false hope. For example, if they have a medical situation that may not always get better, we don't want to push that along and think that they will have a false hope or false sense of reality. So we also don't want to be dishonest or artificial. One can always tell. So, if a person's being genuine, and it takes time to form trust in relationships. So you want to make sure that you're being as honest as possible. I get reminded this too, like if I make a mistake, I make an error in judgment or numbers, I always say, I'm sorry, I made a mistake. or I just don't know. So I just try to make sure I remember that, and I have to remind myself that too. We don't know all things always. Judgments. Don't be judgmental. Okay, this is a key thing. Keep an open mind. Everyone's got a different story and different experiences, reasons. So we want to make sure that we are aware of that. And then also not whispering to others. If you're in front of a person and their personal support worker, another person, medical person comes in, don't speak to that person as a third party in front of this person and whisper, right? Obviously that's common sense, but just something to keep in mind, right? And don't talk in front of them as if they aren't there. So if a person has an issue and they don't understand you, then don't speak to them like as if they don't exist and they're not there. You're speaking to them as an adult. So you want to encourage that. Some do's, some don'ts as well. It's don't discuss your own problems. We keep those separate from our conversations and our meetings. And we don't need to bring more misery, right? So to that, if you have an issue, you do that separately with someone else. Don't question them about their illness. Again, this is important because if a person has an issue, you don't want to try to become a player of all things and have all the hats. You may not be aware of their situation and medical background, so try not to ask and probe about those personal medical stories and histories. Don't force the person to talk. If they don't want to talk, they don't want to talk. So you can't push that from someone if they don't want to share with you. You can just do something else, maybe do an activity, go for a walk, talk about the weather, right? Say what you feel. Don't speak in a natural tone of voice. So if you are, straining your voice too much, or if you're heightening your voice, just please be careful to keep your voice as natural as possible. I get excited a lot about things, and I often try to have to tame myself down, especially being around children all the time. So I try to also not speak too loudly. So if you hear me well, that's great, but just keep that in mind that you might be too loud sometimes, and how a person might receive your information. If they happen to have a hearing aid, that can also play a big role in how they hear you. You may want to ask them, do you hear me well? Is this okay volume wise? Don't point out mistakes. So if they have, for example, issue, don't bring up the issue. Don't buy them gifts. Don't accept gifts. This is a general rule again. If you have questions about that rule, this came from us because of experiences that we've had in the past. Joe may like his vase and on his mantle, and one day you come to see Joe, and Joe wants to give you the vase. It's beautiful, it's a nice gesture, but you can't receive the gift, okay? That vase leaves that room, and next day Joe's son comes by and he says, where's that vase? And he says, oh, I gave it to Kathy. They're going to start asking some questions, right? And why is that happening? So definitely don't accept gifts. We appreciate it. You say how thankful you are, but we don't take gifts. But thank you so much. I'm here to see you, and you don't require any gifts. And then, of course, ending the visit, it's important to end the visit well. One thing I often share with people is, everyone has good days and bad days, right? We don't know what happened to, every one of you that came in today, and I'm sure you went through a lot to be here. So thank you for being here, being present. But, adjusting your visits accordingly based on what a person's feelings are is important here. And it's important too to mention that, there may be prayer requests. A person may feel like, oh, I just don't want to talk, I want to pray. Go for it, be open to that. Prayer requests come in different waves. They might come at the beginning and the end, doesn't matter, throughout. Respecting their beliefs is really important. Ask God to, comfort and sustain that patient, that person, individual. And remember to include in your prayer the patient's family. If you happen to know their names or their family members, you can mention them as well. They will appreciate that, I'm sure. Also, short welcome visits are better than long visits. They call them a doctor visit, in and out type of thing for a reason. So if you want to be short and sweet versus long and labored, great. It maybe not be long and labored, but sometimes if you lengthen a visit, it can be felt by the person, and you don't want that. So it takes an effect on you too. So you just want to be as welcoming as possible to how the visit will play out. And people's situations change, their health may change in the moment too. So you may want to just be aware of that and move on to the next thing. If they want to move or relocate, or if just ending the visit might be better, that's great too. And then planning your next visit. So you do want to make sure you thank them for the visit that when you leave, but you want to plan especially for to when you're going to meet them again, and make sure you make those plans before you leave as well, okay? And adjust accordingly. And in terms of after the visit, you want to keep a journal. Like I said, something simple, very small little notepad is good. It's effective. It keeps your notes in one place, and it makes sure that you can reflect on the visit after. You can even evaluate yourself. Okay, today I think I was a 10 out of 10, or maybe I was a 5. Why was the case? What could I do differently or improve on next time? And then what are some opportunities for enrichment? Maybe you think next time you can help your visit by doing or addressing certain things that they mention with you, and you can help them in those ways, and they're very practical. So that's a great opportunity then. If you have any concerns, you can speak to whoever you're working with. If you're part of a group or organization, you can reach out to those supervisors and those people that are in charge. If you have further issues or questions you want to get some input on, or you have an idea and you want to share it with us, we'd love to hear from you. Call Alex, myself. You can reach our helpline if you have an emergency as well, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, or you can call our office anytime as well. And that's the 2 numbers that are listed online here. Okay. And then from now, I'll just take it away to Alex. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Now, this program, as you can tell, has a lot of information. The whole idea of the program is to be very practical. That's why you also have a booklet with it that you can follow, and that's fine. We do have online also some training sessions we've done in the past. This one's being recorded also, so if you want reminders, that sort of thing. But the question always remains twofold. One is when you're visiting, sometimes it might be awkward to connect with someone. It might be awkward to have that visit. And then there's the second thing: how do we make sure that people are, they're gaining from it? They're feeling like they're lonely. So now we are helping them, because we're visiting them, but they're feeling like their life has meaning, purpose, or value. And so when we were putting together this program, we came across a university study which showed the importance of someone sharing their story. And it was very important. And it showed that when someone shares their story, this really helps them heal. It helps them feel better about their life. It makes a difference in their life. And people feel better about themselves when they share their story. But also we recognize that when you ask someone to join a My Story, so you contact them. So let's say they're in your parish, or they're in your community, and you say, well, we're getting together as a group of people, and we're wanting to know about you. We're wanting to know about your story. Tell us about your past. Tell us what happened in your past, and you spend time with them. It's an easier door to open to visit someone when you have that sort of a reason. It keeps it simple, right? It's a simple way to come in. As a prime example, if you were a member of let's say a Knights of Columbus group, and you say, well, we're going to come visit. Then you may say, well, why is Norman coming to visit? Why would he do that? They might be saying, well, when you're using the My Story program that we have, then there seems to be a reason. I just want to find out about you. I want to find out about your past. We're doing this as an organization. We're visiting people, and we're finding out about their past. So what happens? Well, when they're sharing about their story, it allays their depression. Why? Because it helps them feel better about themselves. They're talking about themselves. If you talk about yourself and someone's interested in yourself, well, obviously you feel better about yourself. And that's the primary purpose of what we're doing. Remember, we're not visiting people just so we can feel better about ourselves. We're visiting people because we know that they're lonely and alone, etc. The other thing is this whole issue of generativity, which already came up. We have a history, we have a purpose, there's things we did. What about our loneliness? You feel like your life is, especially if the spouse has passed away, and you start looking at your life and saying, well, that's all behind me. But when you start talking about it, it's not all behind you. It's a connected thing. It's part of who I am, right? Self-awareness, self-discovery, discussion about yourself. These are all important things. Self-esteem. A lot of people who are older and are alone, they're lacking self-esteem, not because of any other reason, and they spend a lot of time alone, and it's very hard to feel good about yourself, when you're living in social isolation. But also when you're talking about My Story, when we go through the My Story people, sometimes things in their past come up, such as trauma. And we're not trying to bring up trauma. We're not trying to talk about it. We're not trying to be psychiatrists or psychologists or anything. We're obviously trying to be a friend. We're trying to be friendly with somebody. But the fact of it is sometimes these issues come up, and then therefore there's a form of healing that goes on. And we move on to the next screen. Right. So why does the My Story program really matter? Well, recalling events and feelings or key topics and sharing memories, this is important. you identify yourself as having a purpose, a meaning, what you did. It's important, it's a form of healing of the person. So, a lot of people have experienced things in life, but it's not only a form of healing, it's a form of recall. It's a form of talking about yourself. A guy, Mike mentioned it, Dr. DeVeber. Dr. DeVeber was the founder of the Euthanasia Prevention Coalition, and he was a very famous physician here in Canada who did a lot of amazing, amazing things. And as he was getting much older, my wife, Susan, sat down with him and interviewed him about his life. And at this point, Dr. DeVeber had done incredible things in his life, but his short-term memory was having some difficulties, but he had no problem telling the stories of when he was in university, becoming a physician, his early times when he first became a physician, the research he had done and all these kind of things. He was able to go through all of that without a difficulty. That was not his difficulty. What maybe happened 5 or 6 days ago was starting to get a bit difficult for him, like his short-term memory, but his long-term memory was excellent. And so my wife spent time with him. That was a great experience for him and for his family that was done. It really, it really made him feel great. Well, he had done amazing things in his life, but also, as you're getting older, you start looking back and you start thinking like, who am I? What's so special about what I did? But when you start talking about it, you start realizing, yes, I did those things. And it makes you feel a lot better about yourself. But it also improves people's cognitive function, because a lot of people have difficulties with their cognitive function as they're getting older. I'm 55 and I'm having a hard time remembering names. It also shows that they have an importance in this world. It's very practical. It's a very practical thing to do. Talk to them about their life. Ask them about their life. And if you go through that My Story booklet we have, and there's different questions we've done for different groups also, because other groups have gotten involved with it and done a My Story booklet. And Kathy might want to look and talk about that near the end. But we created special questions just for that also. But these are just the basic practical things, talking to someone and reviewing one's life and writing down one's story. It has incredible benefits, not only for a history for a group. What you need to know is that whether you, and a lot of people don't realize this, we talk about teen suicide as being epidemic and a problem. And certainly there's a lot more teen suicide in our culture, and this is a serious problem. All suicide is preventable. All suicide is very terrible. But what you need to know actually is in the United States right now, the highest suicide rate is amongst men 85 and older. That's the highest suicide rate. The second highest suicide rate is men 75 to 85. That's the second highest suicide rate in the US. And I've written about this because I look at the issue of euthanasia and assisted suicide, and I recognize that there's been what you call an effect on the culture and how we view suicide. And I think it's quite clear, because if you look at the countries that have legalized euthanasia or assisted suicide and the ones who haven't, and you look at their demographics for suicide, you realize in the US, for instance, where they have assisted suicide in 10 states, the states where they've legalized assisted suicide, they have a different demographic than in the states they haven't legalized it. And if you look at Europe, for instance, the Netherlands has, anyway, you can go into, I've done a lot of articles about this, but nonetheless, this shows you that there's a lot of lonely older people who are now dying by suicide. I think this has been affected by the legalization of euthanasia. What we're doing is we're helping people to find a purpose to live. A lot of people become very depressed, and they really question what is their purpose for living. Participation in a My Story program significantly lowers depression. We move on. Generativity. Well, this is very important. It's the ability to care for others and guiding the next generation. Everyone wonders, what have they accomplished? What have they achieved? It's important that we pass on to the next generation. I talk about the problem with this culture now is we've lost this generativity. We've become very self-absorbed. We're very, me culture. And what happens then is you lose that interconnectedness with previous generations, because it's all about me. It's all about what I want. It's all about, and you lose that interconnectedness. And we need that interconnectedness for a healthy society. We need to have this connection from the past to the present. Also, it's important to share values, but being assured that one's life had meaning to others is really important to somebody. People start really having difficulties as they get older, especially when they're lonely. The My Story helps them connect to their past, and I think that's essential to the program. We move on. Loneliness. Well, loneliness is a psychological state, and actually, Kathy's talked about loneliness already and the issues around loneliness. but also it's a risk of an early death. So if those of you were part of my presentation, I showed clearly that in the studies that have been done in other countries, that you see the direct connection between people who are experiencing loneliness and early death. In fact, in tomorrow's little video we're going to show, you'll see the direct connection between, in fact, they say that loneliness is equal to smoking like 2 packs of cigarettes a day, or it's equal to being morbidly obese. Now, you may say that seems ridiculous, Alex, but in fact, if you look at the data shows that people who are very lonely have a much shorter lifespan and they have significant health problems. And so you would say, how is that? Well, it affects we become depressed, we become down, etc. But My Story eases this, because they're talking about themselves. So the point of the My Story program, it was to give somebody the opportunity to talk about themselves, to make them feel better. It allays that feeling of loneliness, but also depression. Conversation combats loneliness. Yes, we move on. My Story also promotes and reinforces a person's place in society. A lot of us start wondering at a time, I've already mentioned this before, we wonder, what have we really done? Where have we really been? It's not abnormal to be like this. With this whole thing, it makes you understand that you had an important place in society, not only in life, but I mean, you still have an important place. You are interconnected with your past. People have family. The problem today is a lot of people with their family, the family isn't around them anymore, right? The family, they don't, it's not like previous generations where there was more connectedness. Now, you talk to a lot of people and they have got no kids near them. They may have had 4 kids, but nobody lives near them anymore. And in fact, I just had that conversation with somebody the other day, and they were talking about none of their kids live near them at all. Anyway, it encourages that and acknowledges this, and the reminiscing is important. Reminiscent therapy is important. We're not getting into therapy because we're not therapists, but you know what I mean? We're just reminiscing is important. We move on. Self-esteem. Well, it helps a person reconcile with the past. Sometimes things come up that, can be a problem. Now, a lot of people aren't just going to start talking about their past and things like that and whatever, but it's interesting. I have a friend and he's gone through a lot of difficulty lately, and he was talking to me about it, and I was encouraging him. This guy is not much older than me. I'm 55, as I already said, and he's probably closer to 60, but his marriage has broken down. He's got a lot of issues, and we were talking about it, and he started talking about his past, and I'm just being a friend. So I'm listening and I'm caring, and I recognize you can't change the past. Sometimes these things come up. How do you handle these things? Well, you handle them by, we don't acknowledge that anything can change from the past, but we recognize that when someone feels comfortable to talk about this, that we're not judging them in any way. We're just trying to give them a safe place, in a sense. You're just trying to be a friend. We're not analyzing anybody. We're not. And offering, oh, well, maybe you should have done this, probably doesn't help. If they're expressing it, it's good for them to get it off their chest, and then it's done sometimes, and sometimes it makes them feel a little better. But anyway, we're not encouraging that. This is not our goal, but I'm saying sometimes this does happen, and I'm being brutally honest. Sometimes it will, and this fulfills a psychological need that people have to talk about these things, to try and deal with what happened in their past. Your story is important. You are important. We move on. Social relationships. Well, we're human beings. We need each other. We need to be with others. We're absolutely made to be interconnected. That's why this world is in such a bad place in some ways, because we've turned it upside down. We talk about the individual and individualism, and I have the ability, I can do what I want and all the rest of it. But guess what? You don't function that way, actually. You function in relationships. Like, what would Alex be without his wife? Honestly, what would I be like without my wife? I'm brutally honest about it. I'm thankful I have her in my life. Like, gosh, my children, social engagement, preventing isolation. This is all important. We do this when we're visiting somebody. When we talk with them, we spend time with them. You validate that they are important. You see, we're running this program not because Alex needs, this extra little special time, and I'll be validated by the fact that I'm visiting someone. No, I'm trying to be with someone to validate them. I'm recognizing that they're lonely and they need somebody. This is a special individual with a lifetime of experiences, and we're asking them to talk to us about their experiences. Trauma. Well, I've already brought up trauma. It comes up again because of the fact that sometimes this thing gets discussed. So reminiscent therapy, you can look it up. Reminiscent therapy is quite important for people to deal with their past issues. Sometimes their past issues are very big, and that's not anything that we can deal with, nor would we attempt to. I'm not saying that we're even trying to bring these things up, because in fact we're not. But the fact of it is if it does come up, you sometimes just have to listen. As I say, this is a healing component. My mother started doing some contacting people and talking to people in her hometown and visiting with them. She's done a lot of visiting over her life already, but after taking this training program, she thought, I know this person in my parish who seems to be quite alone, and I've talked to her a few times. So she called her up and said, can I come visit you and we talk about these things? Just talk about your life. I'm just interested. And this woman shared and shared and shared and was just so happy. She, and at the end, she sort of let it all off her chest and talked about these terrible things that happened in her past. And my mom had no idea. She had no idea. Nonetheless, in the end, the lady was so happy that someone had come to talk to her, even though my mom was in no way having any idea that this is what was going to happen. But it did happen. And of course, there was no judgment or anything. It's just that you're realizing, oh, this is a very touchy situation, but it helps someone to talk about these things. And sadly, some people have had some very bad things happen in life. So the basic questions we're dealing with, I think Kathy has put up the link up for the book there, so you can look at it. Remember, anything you want, we're willing to send you the hard copy too. We have hard copy of everything, so it's not a problem. We've sent you emails with the PDF, so that's fine. And the other thing is, if let's say a group, so for instance, in the Diocese of London, the Catholic CWL group in the Diocese of London decided to do a 100th anniversary My Story. So they took the training and everything, the visiting, and they started contacting their older members. And from that, we produced an amazing booklet of these stories. Of course, people gave permission to have them published, so it wasn't an issue. But we also created special questions for them, because obviously these ladies were involved in the Catholic Women's League. So just talking about their past was not necessarily what the Catholic Women's League were necessarily looking for. Not to say that it wasn't important, but we created special questions with them that would fit for their purposes also. And an amazing booklet was created. And wonderful, wonderful, wonderful. And, and a lot of people got so much out of it. It was amazing because, we started getting, the ladies were contacting us saying, oh, guess what? We were visiting so-and-so. And then we found out, oh, well, her friend, who was also involved with the Catholic Women's League in the past, but of course she's much older, and I was wondering why we hadn't contacted her yet. So then we contacted her, and we spent time talking with her and visiting with her, and we gained her story too. And this is how it just grew, and it just sort of blossomed. And at the end, they were saying, oh, we wish we had sent in more stories because this was such a good experience. So anyway, the basic questions, that is what this is actually dealing with. And I think that's essential. And if you look through the booklet, you'll see that everything we've done is very basic on purpose. No one has recreated any wheels, right? There's no new wheel here. What we did is we looked at best practices. We looked at trying to make things very practical. We want you actually to do visiting, not just think about it and say, oh, that's probably a good idea. We want you to actually be able to do it, and we want you to feel you have the ability to do this. So tomorrow's presentation, we'll go through quite a few more topics. But we do have a bit of time for questions, because we promised to be done by 9 and it's only 8:25. That doesn't mean we won't leave early, because obviously you might appreciate it more if we're done early. But if you do have questions, Byron's got his hand up, so he can unmute himself. Kathy will unmute herself, and you can ask whatever you want, Byron.
Okay, actually, it's more of a statement than a question. I've visited a number of people, and I find that some people view life as being very difficult for themselves. And life doesn't have to be difficult. So long as our attitude is one of openness to the events which occur each day, and we accept all that takes place in each circumstance without losing our sense of peace, then we will find that we're able to draw at least one good lesson from the experience. God never permits us or permits anything to happen to us in our lives that's not for our ultimate good. So even bad experiences can have good lessons to learn from. So each day we need to basically enjoy the day